There are phases in life when your attention begins to change before your circumstances do. Nothing dramatic may happen around you, no visible event, no sudden turning point, no clear announcement that something important has begun. And yet somewhere beneath ordinary thoughts, something subtle starts rearranging itself. A feeling becomes harder to ignore. A question stays longer than usual. Certain images begin to feel strangely meaningful, even when you cannot explain why. Sometimes this happens quietly. You look at ordinary things and notice that one of them seems to hold more weight than the others. Not because it is more beautiful, not because it is more logical, but because something in it seems already connected to a part of you that has been waiting to be noticed. Inner change often arrives like that. It rarely introduces itself directly. It appears through preference, through hesitation, through attraction, through a small pause that lasts half a second longer than expected. The mind often wants reasons, but deeper perception does not always arrive with reasons first. Sometimes it arrives as recognition before language. There are moments when a single visual choice can feel unexpectedly personal because symbols often reach places that direct questions cannot. A symbol does not force an answer. It simply stands still until something inside you responds. And perhaps that is why this kind of exercise can feel surprisingly revealing. Not because an image contains certainty, and not because one choice defines who you are, but because what attracts you in a quiet moment may reflect what your inner world is leaning toward right now. You may be entering a phase where clarity matters more than noise. Or perhaps you are carrying emotions that have not fully found words yet. Maybe part of you is learning patience with uncertainty, or maybe there is a quieter need emerging beneath your daily rhythm, asking for attention in a form so subtle that it can only be noticed when everything slows down. What matters here is not speed, it is honesty. Before interpretation begins, allow yourself a brief pause. Notice how you feel when nothing is demanded of you for a moment. Sometimes your most immediate instinct says more than your carefully arranged explanations ever could. In front of you now, imagine 4 windows. Each one is still. Each one opens toward a different atmosphere, a different kind of silence, a different emotional landscape. None of them asks to be chosen loudly. None of them tries to persuade you. Yet very often, one of them begins to feel familiar, almost immediately, as if your attention settles there before your thoughts have time to interfere. A window is an unusual symbol because it does not function like a door. A door suggests movement, action, crossing into something new. A window is different. A window allows observation without immediate decision. It creates distance, but not separation. It lets you remain where you are, while still connecting with something beyond your present position. That is why windows often reflect states of awareness more than states of action. They can represent the way you are currently relating to yourself, to change, to memory, to expectation, or even to possibilities you have not yet named. Sometimes what appears beyond a window matters less than the feeling created when you look through it. A bright horizon may not simply suggest openness, it may awaken something in you that longs for relief. Rain may not only suggest melancholy, it may resonate with emotional depth or unfinished reflection. Mist may not mean confusion alone. It can also suggest a stage where old certainties are dissolving so that something less visible can emerge. Warm interior light may not be only comfort. It may reflect a quiet desire for restoration. This exercise is not meant to define your personality. It is not a diagnosis, not a fixed description, and not a prediction. It simply offers a symbolic mirror for this particular moment in your life. Try not to choose based on what seems ideal. The most revealing choice is often not the one you admire most, but the one that feels strangely close, even if you do not fully understand why. Sometimes instinct recognizes emotional truth before language catches up. That first inner movement, the slight pull toward one image rather than another, often carries more meaning than prolonged comparison. So before choosing, let your breathing settle for a moment. Release the need to analyze. There is no correct answer here, only resonance. The window that calls your attention first may simply reflect what part of your inner world is asking to be acknowledged right now. Take a quiet moment before deciding. Imagine the 4 windows clearly in front of you, each one carrying its own atmosphere, its own rhythm, its own emotional temperature. Do not rush toward explanation yet. Simply notice where your attention goes when you stop trying to make the perfect choice. Perhaps one window feels immediately familiar. Perhaps another creates curiosity, even if you do not know why. Sometimes the image that stays with you is not the one that seems most pleasant, but the one that touches something already active inside you. Try not to ask yourself which window looks better, calmer, stronger, or more hopeful. A symbolic choice becomes meaningful only when it comes from recognition rather than preference shaped by expectation. Ask yourself very softly, which window feels closest to the place I'm standing internally right now? Not where you want to be, not where you think you should be, only where something inside you quietly says, "This feels near." You may notice that your choice appears almost instantly. That first response often arrives before thought has time to organize itself, and that is exactly why it matters. Instinct rarely speaks loudly, but it often speaks first. Once you have your choice, stay with it. There is no need to reconsider. The meaning is not hidden in complexity. It often begins in the simplest reaction. Now hold the image of your chosen window in mind, because each one may reflect a different inner movement that is unfolding in you at this moment. If you were drawn to the first window, the one filled with open light, distant space, and a sense that the horizon continues farther than the eye can easily hold, your inner world may currently be leaning toward expansion, even if your outer life still feels undecided. Light often attracts people who are quietly moving away from emotional heaviness, not always because everything has become easy, but because some part of them has reached a threshold where staying inside old mental weather no longer feels possible. This does not necessarily mean that a major change has already happened. More often, it means that an inner readiness has begun before visible movement appears. There are moments when a person does not yet know what must change, only that something familiar has started to feel too narrow. When this window feels close, it can suggest that you are sensing this widening already. Perhaps certain conversations no longer satisfy you in the same way. Perhaps routines that once felt stable now feel incomplete. Perhaps you have begun noticing a subtle desire for honesty, simplicity, or distance from what feels emotionally crowded. The openness beyond this window may reflect a need for perspective. Sometimes when people carry too much internally for too long, they begin to long not for dramatic answers, but for space. Mental space, emotional air, silence that does not ask anything from them. The attraction to brightness often appears when clarity has become more valuable than intensity. This can also happen during periods when you are quietly releasing something, even if you have not named it fully yet. It may be an expectation you carried for years, a version of yourself shaped by old obligations, or a way of thinking that once protected you, but no longer fits the person you are becoming. What makes this phase important is that release does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it looks like becoming less interested in conflict. Sometimes it feels like wanting fewer explanations. Sometimes it appears as a growing attraction to what feels clean, direct, and emotionally breathable. People drawn to this window often stand between uncertainty and possibility. You may not yet have a clear plan. You may still question whether your instincts are reliable. Yet even without full certainty, something in you may already know that remaining emotionally where you were is no longer enough. There is often quiet courage here, because choosing light does not mean choosing ease. Light reveals. It makes hidden things visible. It can expose truths that were easier to ignore in dimmer emotional conditions. That is why this choice may also suggest that you are becoming more willing to see yourself without decoration. Your motives, your fatigue, your hopes, your contradictions. Not with judgment, but with increasing honesty. Sometimes people think clarity arrives as confidence, but often it begins more gently. It begins when confusion loses its authority. It begins when what once distracted you no longer holds the same power. It begins when silence starts to feel more trustworthy than noise. This window may also reflect a growing trust in what lies ahead, even if that trust is still fragile. You may not know the exact shape of the future, but some part of you may already feel that openness is safer than repetition. And that matters, because growth often begins not when certainty appears, but when the inner self becomes willing to look farther than what has already been known. If this window felt like yours, then perhaps your inner world is not asking for immediate answers. Perhaps it is simply asking for room to breathe, room to imagine differently, room to allow what is next to arrive without forcing it too soon. If the second window held your attention, the one touched by rain, softened by muted light, and wrapped in an atmosphere where everything seems quieter than usual, your inner world may currently be moving through a deeply reflective phase, where emotion is present not as chaos, but as depth. Rain often changes the way a scene is perceived. Edges become gentler, sounds feel distant, movement slows naturally. Because of this, people who feel drawn toward this kind of image are often responding to a state within themselves where emotional awareness has become especially active. Not necessarily sadness and not necessarily heaviness, but a stronger sensitivity to what is subtle, unfinished, or quietly meaningful. You may be someone who notices emotional details that others pass over quickly. The tone behind a sentence, the pause before someone answers, the feeling left behind after an ordinary interaction. These things may stay with you longer than expected. Even when nothing dramatic is happening, your attention may continue processing layers that are not immediately visible. This choice often appears during periods when something inside is being understood slowly. It may involve memory, but not always in a nostalgic way. Sometimes it is simply that certain past experiences are returning internally because they are asking to be interpreted differently now than they were before. A conversation from months ago may suddenly feel clearer. A past decision may begin to reveal meaning you did not notice when it first happened. An emotional pattern may become easier to recognize because you now have enough distance to observe it with more honesty. Rain carries that kind of symbolic energy, not dramatic revelation, but patient emotional unfolding. If this window feels familiar, there may be a part of you that is currently less interested in quick certainty and more willing to remain with complexity. That is not weakness. In many cases, it reflects emotional maturity, because staying present with what cannot yet be solved often requires more strength than escaping into immediate distraction. At times, this phase can feel lonely, especially if others around you expect clarity before you are ready to name what you are feeling. But inner processes do not always follow visible timelines. Some understandings arrive only when enough silence has gathered around them. People drawn to this window often have strong emotional memory. Certain atmospheres stay with them. Certain words continue echoing long after others have forgotten them. This can create richness, but it also requires balance, because reflection becomes difficult when memory starts holding too much weight. That is why this choice may also suggest a quiet lesson. Feeling deeply does not require carrying everything indefinitely. Emotional honesty becomes healthier when it includes movement, not only contemplation. The rain beyond this window may represent a need to let certain thoughts remain unfinished for a while without forcing conclusion. Not every feeling demands immediate resolution. Some simply ask to be acknowledged without being turned into judgment. There may also be a part of you learning that tenderness and strength are not opposites. Many people who choose this image have learned resilience privately without needing to announce it. They know how to remain present even when emotions become layered, and they often understand others more deeply because of what they themselves have carried quietly. Still, there is an important difference between honoring emotion and living inside it continuously. This window does not suggest staying in old weather forever. It suggests listening carefully enough to understand what the rain is revealing before it passes. If this image felt closest to you, then perhaps your inner world is asking for patience, not because you are lost, but because something meaningful is still taking shape beneath the surface. If the third window felt most familiar, the one that opens toward mist, distant outlines, or a landscape where shapes exist but refuse to become fully clear, your inner world may currently be in a phase where transformation is happening before explanation becomes possible. Mist is unusual because it does not remove reality. It simply changes how much of it can be seen at once. The path still exists, the distance remains, the landscape has not disappeared, yet the mind can no longer rely on full visibility. For many people, this creates discomfort. But for others, especially those who are already moving through inner transition, this atmosphere feels strangely truthful. Choosing this window often reflects a moment when old definitions no longer fit as securely as they once did. You may notice that certain goals, identities, or expectations that once felt stable now seem less convincing, even if nothing externally has forced you to abandon them. This can feel confusing because the outer structure of life may still look similar, while the inner relationship to it quietly changes. There are phases when a person senses movement inward, long before they can describe what is changing. Familiar answers stop feeling complete. Advice that once sounded useful now feels distant. Even your own previous certainty may seem difficult to recover in the same form. This does not necessarily mean something is wrong. Very often it means that deeper internal reorganization has begun. People drawn to mist are often standing near an important threshold where intuition becomes more active than conclusion. You may be noticing subtle discomfort with what no longer reflects who you are becoming, even if you cannot yet name what should replace it. That in-between state can feel unsettling because the mind naturally prefers clarity. But many meaningful shifts begin exactly here. Mist symbolically belongs to unfinished emergence. It appears when one stage has weakened, but another has not yet fully arrived. This can affect how you experience time. Some days may feel strangely slow, not because nothing is happening, but because internal processing is demanding attention beneath ordinary routines. Decisions that once felt simple may now require more silence. Questions that used to have immediate answers may remain open longer than expected. There may also be a stronger sensitivity to contradiction during this period. You might feel uncertain and calm at the same time, detached in one moment, deeply perceptive in another, curious about change, while also resisting how undefined it feels. That contradiction is often natural during transformation. The fog outside this window can also suggest that your deeper mind is asking for trust without complete control. Not blind trust, but patient trust. the kind that accepts that not every direction becomes visible all at once. Sometimes people in this phase think they are standing still because there is no dramatic progress to measure. Yet inner change often looks quiet from the outside. A person may appear unchanged while internally releasing entire frameworks of thought, old loyalties, inherited beliefs, or emotional habits that no longer fit. This window often belongs to those who are becoming less willing to move automatically through life. Even uncertainty may feel preferable to returning to patterns that no longer feel true. There can also be fear here, because mist removes guarantees, but it also sharpens listening. When vision shortens, attention changes. Smaller signals become meaningful. Tone, intuition, instinct, and emotional resonance often become stronger guides than external certainty. If this image drew you in, then perhaps your inner world is not asking for immediate clarity. Perhaps it is asking for permission to remain in transition long enough for something honest to form. Not every important phase arrives with visible direction. Sometimes growth begins exactly when the old map fades, and you learn that your own quiet perception can guide you farther than certainty ever did. If the fourth window felt closest to you, the one carrying gentle warmth, soft interior light, or the feeling of shelter rather than distance, your inner world may currently be leaning toward restoration more than movement. Unlike the other windows that suggest horizon, weather, or uncertainty beyond the glass, this one often creates an entirely different emotional response. It does not invite you to look farther away. It invites you to notice what happens when a space feels safe enough for your attention to soften. People are often drawn to this kind of image when something inside has become quietly tired, even if they continue functioning normally in daily life. The tiredness may not be obvious to others. In fact, it often appears in people who have remained responsible, adaptive, available, and steady for longer than they themselves fully recognize. There are phases when strength becomes so habitual that a person forgets how much effort ordinary balance has required. You continue answering messages, making decisions, meeting expectations, staying composed, but beneath that rhythm, there may be a quieter need growing stronger. The need not to perform steadiness for a moment, but to actually feel held by something calm. That is what this window often reflects. Warm light has a different psychological language than open brightness. Open brightness suggests expansion. Warm light suggests containment. It does not ask you to become more. It asks whether you have allowed yourself enough space to remain human without pressure. If this image resonated with you, there may be a part of you that is beginning to value emotional safety more consciously. Not because you have become fragile, but because you understand more clearly what constant tension costs when carried too long. Sometimes this phase appears after extended adaptation. You may have adjusted to uncertainty, responsibility, or emotional demands so consistently that rest began to feel secondary. Yet eventually the inner self begins signaling differently. It no longer asks for achievement first. It asks for gentleness. This does not always mean literal sleep or inactivity. Often it means wanting fewer emotional demands, fewer explanations, fewer environments where your energy must remain guarded. The warmth beyond this window can symbolize a desire to return to what feels steady and emotionally breathable. This may include familiar routines, trusted people, quiet evenings, private rituals, or simply moments where nothing needs to be solved immediately. People drawn to this image often carry more internal effort than they openly express. Others may see them as capable and stable, while privately they are navigating accumulated fatigue that has not fully been acknowledged. That is why this choice may also suggest an important lesson. Restoration is not something that must be earned after complete exhaustion. It is something that prevents deeper depletion when recognized early enough. There can sometimes be guilt attached to this need. Many people feel uncomfortable slowing down because they associate stillness with falling behind. But emotional systems do not recover through constant acceleration. They recover through intervals of safety. Warmth also symbolizes permission, permission to lower internal defenses, permission to stop translating every feeling into productivity, permission to remain unfinished without immediately correcting it. This window often belongs to those learning that care is not weakness. Protection is not avoidance. A quiet evening can hold as much psychological value as visible progress. If this image felt like yours, then perhaps your inner world is asking for less pressure and more steadiness, less proving and more presence. Not every meaningful movement happens outwardly. Sometimes one of the most important things a person can do is create enough inner warmth that their own thoughts no longer feel like a place they must rush through. Now that all 4 windows have been explored, what matters most is not treating your choice as a fixed label, but noticing why that image met you so quickly in this particular moment. A symbolic choice rarely describes an entire personality. More often, it reflects what your inner world is leaning toward now: clarity, emotional depth, transformation, or restoration. And these states are not separate identities. They often coexist, overlap, and change as life continues. A person may seek light while still carrying rain. Someone moving through uncertainty may also long for warmth. Inner life is rarely made of only one atmosphere. That is why this exercise is less about definition and more about recognition. Sometimes the simple act of noticing what feels familiar already creates a small shift in awareness. You may find that months from now, a different window speaks more strongly. That would not mean your first choice was wrong. It would simply mean something inside you has moved, and inner movement is often the quietest kind of change. If one of these reflections stayed with you, share in the comments which window you chose and whether its meaning felt close to your current state. Not to explain yourself completely, but simply to observe yourself with honesty. Because sometimes the clearest beginning is not finding answers immediately. It is noticing what your attention already knows